So sometimes you want to keep several related pieces of information together. Like, for example, let's suppose you decide to model a point, for example. What you can do is you can create something called a structure. A structure is created by using the struct keyword. And essentially you define a struct like this. So I define a struct called point, and then inside the point I can define what actually makes a point. So for example, a two-dimensional point in Cartesian coordinates will have the x and y coordinates, and I can define those. So for both of these I define the name, in this case x, and I define a type, let's say f64, and I can define the y coordinate as well. So that's going to be an f64 as well, and I now have my structure. So what can I actually do with this structure? Well, let's make a function where we're actually going to use this point. I'm going to call this structures. So this is going to be a separate function that we use. Structures like so. So first of all, I need to actually create a point. I need to make a point which has the coordinates x and y. This is actually very easy to do. All I have to do is say something like let p equals point, and then open the curly braces and define the x and y coordinates. And the way we do this is in a syntax which is very similar to what we have here. So we say x colon, and then we give x some value, let's say 3.0, and we do the same for y. So y would have the value 4.0, for example. So now I have my point, and what I can do is I can output the actual x and y coordinates of that point. The way to do this, let me just show you. So we have point P is at, and then curly curly. So to get the x and y coordinates of the point, we begin by using the P. So we say P, and then we put a dot and get the x. So to get the x coordinate of a point that we've just created, we say P dot x. And the same goes for the y coordinate. So we say P dot y, and this gives us the values 3 and 4. Let's actually run this to see the output. Alright, so point P is at 3, 4. So this is our point. Okay, so what we can now do is we can start using this point in other structures, because structures can use structures. Let's make another point, by the way. Let's have P2 as another point with coordinates x of 5, for example, and the y coordinate having the value of 10. So I now have a point P and another point P2. Let's suppose I want to introduce the idea of lines. So when you define a line is essentially the start point and the end point. So we can make another struct. We can make a struct called line, and inside this struct, what we can do is we can define the start point to be of type point, and obviously the end is also of type point. Okay, so now that we have P and P2, what we can do is we can actually define a line. So I can say let my line equals line, open the curly brace. The start point is going to be P, and the end point is going to be P2. So this is the basic gist of how you would typically work with structs.